Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another Spooktober edition of the Seaman Cinema Sit Down and back into my classic horror movie week. For me, the classic horror villains are some of my favorites, and we're finally going to get to dive into a couple of guys that appear on my shirt as we come to the end of this week. And the first of these two gentlemen that we will meet is one of my favorite. There is something about Freddy Krueger, very similarly to Chucky, that you just inherently have to love as a horror fan because they act so differently, and they are so different than most of, their predecessors and, like-minded other villains. And that's in the fact that, both of them run their mouth. Yes, Chucky is also a human that's possessing a toy. But, as characters, both him and Freddy get to run their mouth a lot. They get to be jokey as well as terrifying. And speaking of Chucky, we just talked about Child's Play 2, which is my second favorite on this list of my classic sequels. If you want to see my thoughts on Child's Play 2, you can see them right up there. But now, we turn our attention to the other motor mouth funny guy in the world of horror that I can sit and watch Robert Enguld do this character all day, every day. However, this is, again, one of those sequels that really misses the mark, and for me is my second least favorite on our list. What am I talking about? Why don't you pull up a chair? Take a seat. We're getting ready to dive in spoiler-free as much as we can for a movie from the 80s, because I've never reviewed it before. But we're diving in to A Nightmare on Elm Street, Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, and yeah, this one misses the mark. Similarly to what we kind of talked about with Candyman 2, I'm always going to enjoy our main antagonists in these movies because the people that they have playing them and what those characters do in pretty much all of these movies is usually the one thing that will always work. And once again, Robert Enguld is fantastic. Is this his best outing as Freddy? Of course not. I think that's probably reserved for the original and for a new Nightmare. But it might not be one of his strongest performances in general, but like I said, anytime that Robert Enguld is on screen, I'm always here for what he has going on. Unfortunately for this movie, very similarly to Candyman 2, I just don't dig very much after Freddy. And it's one of those where sometimes when you get away from the people that bring these things into the world, you lose a little bit of what you had going, and you can kind of feel the absence of Wes Craven with this one. I think from a writing perspective, David Chaskin does an okay job. There are elements to the story that, once again, similarly to Candyman, conceptually I kind of like. You have a new family moving into the house that we were in the first, Nightmare, and you have Freddy wanting to come back after this town for some revenge, and he's gonna, use this new family, and specifically the son of this new family, to help him accomplish those things. And conceptually, I think that's a good starting spot for a sequel for Freddy Krueger. Unfortunately, there just seems to be something that's disconnected here. You don't really get the dream angle and access the way that we do in the first one. It's kind of convoluted. And granted, I know that we're supposed to be oh, are we in a dream sequence? Are we not in a dream sequence? What's going on with Mark Patton's character, Jesse? And sure, but as Freddy is emerging and starting to literally physically take over this kid's body, there's a disconnect where you don't completely understand it until you start to see it. And because of that, and then the material that's given to actors that unfortunately really kind of missed the mark throughout the entire movie. It is not the strongest acted movie in this list at all. It might be one of the worst. No offense to Mark Patton, but he's absolutely terrible in this movie. He's the main reason that this one is kind of rough to go back and rewatch. But that stuff aside, it's just some of that connection, man. I could never really fully get into the story because no matter when I watch this part 2, I'm like, wait, what's going? Let me reconnect the dots and it's too much work for my brain. And Jack Shoulder, he does an okay job behind the camera. I think you could have done a lot better of a job with some of the sequences. I mean, there is a moment in the movie where there is a party of teenagers at its pool party, and then once the parents go to bed, all these kids are just getting into freaky stuff, and it seemed like a really opportune time for Freddy to go crazy, and he goes a little bit crazy, but I feel like Wes Craven could have made that scene one of the most terrifying, gory, bloody sequences in the entire. I mean, there are moments where the pool is about to burst into flame. It is so hot, and kids are just swimming and climbing out. I'm like, what is going on here? That's the stuff that I feel gets dropped sometimes, where I'm like, I spent a real good portion of time in this place, and it wasn't satisfying enough. Now, that being said, we do get some cool gore stuff in this movie. If you're a fan of gore, there are some pretty gnarly sequences, and specifically, anytime you're starting, as the movie goes, and we spend more and more time with Jesse, he starts to understand that Freddy can take over his body. And while it's... And again, this is one of those things that's kind of fuzzy, where it's Jesse doing it, but from Jesse's perspective, Freddy takes his body over in very violent and gory ways. Multiple times in the movie, you might think Jesse is dead, and then he comes back. And the weird thing is everybody else sees Freddy, but then when everything is done, it's just Jesse. That's some of the stuff, like I said, that's just kind of convoluted and weird and doesn't quite connect in this one, but the sequences of Freddy bursting through Jesse, the couple times that they do it in the movie, are spectacular. If you are a fan of gore, you get some wonderful stuff in those sequences. But outside of that, I was kind of surprised, and even now going back to it, surprised that it wasn't as much of a bloodfest as the original, where most of these sequels up the gore. If you take away those Freddy transformation scenes, kind of light for a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And then, like I said, the performances outside of Robert England, who is a gem and a master every time he puts on the Freddy Krueger, makeup and costume. And he has some good one. He's got some good one-liners in this, and he has some, some scary moments, but man, the actors around him this time, I mean, they're bad even by 80s standards. And like I said, no offense to Mark Patton, but dude, just the least believable actor in the whole movie. And he's the guy that we spend pretty much the entire movie with. And I mean, his performance is cringe a lot of times, and specifically around those transformation moments. There are times where Patton is he's almost locked into losing my mind, and then he just goes to a place where I'm like, it doesn't work. And Kim Myers doesn't necessarily do anything wrong, but she doesn't do anything super right either, right? There's nothing in her performance that's super memorable, and it feels like one of those you're looking for a fresh face, a fresh teen body to throw into a horror movie that just doesn't work. And I feel that way about most of the people. I mean, Jesse's parents and family in general, specifically his dad, I hated as characters. I hate his dad as a character. He's just terrible person. But even performance-wise, it's just not good. And unfortunately for Freddy, he finds himself in a pretty bad movie this time around. And like I said, this is probably my second least favorite on the list after Candyman 2, or Candyman Farewell to the Flesh. But once again, like any of these movies, I've seen all of them so many times because they're technically classics, and I love these characters, and I will always spend a little time with Freddy Krueger, even if, the time where he's not on camera doesn't really work. So there you go, man. Those are all the Seaman's thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. That means it's Spooktober score time, so let's get the Seamaniacs up. There they are, and as I mentioned, this is not one of my favorites. It's my second least favorite of this group of movies that we're going into. Robert England, fantastic as per usual, but I don't think they use him in the best ways that they could have used him here. And the cast they surround him with is just really bad, and with a convoluted story that leaves you having to connect a lot of dots yourself to understand what's going on, and more of a disconnect, from those dream sequences than we had in the first one. I mean, some of the most iconic imagery we have in horror. I mean, like the melting staircase. Like, those are things, you go to that first Nightmare and you're like, man, Wes Craven did all this stuff. That's amazing. And there's no moment like that in this. No moment like pulling a kid into the bed and more blood than you could possibly imagine for a human spurting out. And honestly, there's a lack of blood in the movie in general, where a lot of these sequels dial the gore up outside of some really cool transformation sequences. Kind of lacking in that department. So for the Seaman, I gotta go 2 out of 5 Sea-Maniacs. Same as Candyman 2. This is just a bit of a disappointment in an area, in a situation where I feel like we shouldn't be having that big of a letdown. You're still early in these series. You're not having to go to the super ridiculous story places yet. And what's unfortunate is some of those ridiculous story places tend to be more entertaining than an entry like this. So I go 2 out of 5 Sea-Maniacs, tied for Candyman as my least favorite in this grouping. But I do enjoy this one a little bit more than Candyman because, well, Freddy's a lot of fun anytime he's on screen. So there you go, man. Those are all the Seaman's thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now I want to know what you're thinking. How big of a Freddy Krueger fan are you? Do you just adore everything Robert England does with this character? Do you love going to this world? Where does this one fall for you? Is this one a big swing and miss as it is for me, or do you tend to like some things about Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2? And if you haven't seen the movie, would you ever want to see the movie? Is this not your cup of tea? Did you just stop by because you like to see my smiling face? Anything that you guys got, man, whether you've seen it or not, good, bad, indifferent, on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, goes down below in the comments section. Look forward to talking to you guys down there. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with the Seaman all Spooktober long and you haven't yet, you want to show a little love and support because you dig what I'm doing just around movies, TV, and trailer reactions in general, then hey, come join Sea-Maniac Nation. We have a good old time here. It's a great place to be, and it's a super easy thing to join. All you gotta do is jump over there, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts, and until next time, for the Seaman's Cinema, sit down. I've been the Seaman. I'm signing off. Peace. Oh, hey, what's going on? You must be sticking around because you're looking for more content featuring this guy. Well, guess what? You're in the right place. You can check out more videos right here and right here. And if you have and you want to come join that Sea-Maniac Nation, you can hit that subscribe right over there.